It's the greatest mystery in literary history. A divisive question with highly contested answers. Who was the writer behind the pen name William Shakespeare? Welcome to Don't Quill the Messenger. Here's your host, Stephen Sable.
Welcome, fellow Quillers, to this incredible episode where we welcome noted film critic, historian, and Film Institute educator Robert Horton to join us to discuss his research and commentary on the great American Shakespearean Orson Welles. All the way from his current assignment in Wales, Quiller Nation, please welcome Robert Horton.
Hello, Stephen. Nice to be here.
Yeah, Robert, great to have you. Your piece on Welles, and I'll share the title with listeners so they can find it. It's not hard to find online. An American in King Henry's Court, which I love the way that sort of connects to Mark Twain and Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court.
Right.
But it delves very deep into Welles' work on Chimes at Midnight, but it also delves into the personality of this great American filmmaker and, most importantly, true Shakespearean actor.
Yeah, I tried to squeeze in as much as I could about Welles and his life and some ideas about Chimes at Midnight that I was sort of bandying about.
How did Orson Welles, an orphan boy from Kenosha, Wisconsin, become one of the most audacious Shakespeareans who ever lived?
The story, if a lot of your listeners are Shakespeare buffs, which I assume most of them are, they probably encountered Orson Welles at some point, and the lore about Welles is so long that there are probably more books about him maybe than any other American filmmaker. I don't know about actor, but he's kind of a legend, and part of his legend actually started in childhood, and the road to Shakespeare was a very short one because he was born in Kenosha in 1915, and he was kind of famous before he was in double digits. He was some sort of prodigy, some sort of child genius. And everybody told him this, and so he believed it for sure. And so there were he would recite Shakespeare at the age of 4 or 5 or something.
Was he really reciting soliloquies as a child?
It's incredible. He had some kind of gift for that. I mean, there are like newspaper write-ups about him in local papers, about this boy wonder who can do these crazy things. It did get exaggerated. I think I mentioned in my article that somebody thought that he had memorized all of, what was it, King Lear or something. And he said, no, I didn't really do that when I was 10 or something.
Well, I believe it, though. My children growing up in a Shakespearean household, they will often recite Shakespeare left and right, sometimes even in their imaginative play. My eldest can recite an entire play from beginning to end, the lines of every character, just because of attending the full rehearsal process of a play and having practically memorized the entire play by watching the actors recite it over and over again. So I believe that it's possible.
Yeah, I envy young people, the malleable minds that they have.
Right.
I can actually, I mean, in high school, I did memorize, the to be or not to be speech, and I can still summon it up weirdly because I find it really hard to memorize things. So maybe you have something there. But Welles was singled out, and he went to a kind of a special boys' school where they basically said, okay, we have a theater department, but you're so amazing that basically you're going to take over. And he ended up, directing the productions, creating the costumes, painting the sets, and invariably playing the lead role in whatever it was. And just was this wunderkind that people got out of his way because obviously he had something really special, and a lot of bravado to go with it. And so he was a teenager and was already kind of taking things over. There's a story about him that you can find in any of his biographies that at the age of 16, he went over to Ireland and he bluffed his way into a well-known theater company and purported to be a respected American actor, and they either bought it or they were so kind of amused by his chutzpah that they said, well, okay, well, we'll let you play some roles here. But that was the kind of life that he seemed to have. And it always, to get back to your question, it always kind of came back to Shakespeare. He would revisit Shakespeare periodically when he went to New York um, to do stage work and radio work. He always managed to get Shakespeare in there as part of his life, part of his practice, directing, acting, adapting, and so on.
Is there really any other American actor in history who has better mastered the works of the bard in so many ways?
It's hard to think of another American. Yeah, you can think of many English actors, I'm sure, uh, but American actors, yeah. There's he was just he seized it. He wanted to be associated with it. I think as a leading Shakespearean, and for a large part of the mid-century. I mean, you can. There are episodes of I Love Lucy where you can see Orson Welles come on. Apparently, he was old pals with Lucille Ball or something, and he'll just start reciting Shakespeare, or they'll reference his talent as a Shakespearean. It really was always a part of the legend. Yeah,
Well, she was a genius too, so it certainly is not a surprise that they would become fast friends. I mean,
they
birds of a
they
feather kind
recognized
of a
each
thing.
other.
Yeah, I
That's
think.
right. That's right.
And I mean, is there anyone who really can avoid giving credit to Wells based on what he was able to accomplish, not only as a Shakespearean actor, but also as a filmmaker and a director and an adapter of the works? I think we kind of all owe him something, those of us who are practicing the craft today.
He really did blaze a trail. You think of that tendency of anybody who loves Shakespeare and is in a position to stage a play or make a movie or whatever, and the impulse is so frequently, how can we keep this relevant? How can we get people's attention in a jaded world, and show them how alive Shakespeare is still, and how much he has to say to us. Um, and Wells in the 1930s in New York, on the stage, he decided to stage Macbeth with an all black cast, and it was set in the Caribbean, on a Caribbean island, and it was through the National Federal Theater Project, and it was a way of getting all these great black actors who weren't otherwise working into this production, which of course got headlines, and it became the show that you had to see. He did the same thing with Julius Caesar, um, by producing the play and putting all of the actors in the dress of 1930s fascist countries like Italy and Germany, so that nobody could miss the parallels. He had a knack not only for kind of grabbing Shakespeare, um, and wanting to make it vital, but he also knew how to draw attention, to himself, to Shakespeare, to the theater itself. Um, and this is from someone who at the time was like 21, 22 years old.
I know
Um,
it's incredible to think about, and like for instance, and even to this day, his Macbeth production is so legendary. Some people call it the Voodoo Macbeth or the Zulu Macbeth,
yeah.
and so revolutionary and so ahead of his time too. To recognize that there were all of these black actors who were out of work. It was the deep, deep part of the Depression. He had the Mercury Theater, the Federal Theater Project is providing some funding, and he creates
Yeah.
out of this, he comes up with this vision and creates this work for them. And we're talking that, 1931 or 32, somewhere around there. And that's just incredible when you think about what we're doing today here, almost 100 years later, with all black casts of different productions or cross-cultural casting in different genres. And when you think about what he started so long ago and how ahead of his time he was.
Yeah, it's almost like looking back, from our perspective, you think, oh well, that sounds kind of cool, but at the time, yeah, exactly. How how visionary, to just to think of something like that and to stage it with such incredible, according to all of the news reports, such incredible energy and bravado and um, yeah, it kind of takes your breath away. And this is, and I guess if we're talking about Wells, we also have to throw in that this was around the same time. I think it was 1938 that he made his famous radio broadcast. He was already directing and acting for radio, but the Halloween broadcast of the War of the Worlds, which everybody's heard of, I'm sure. But the concept that Wells had was, let's play this as a news report that's unfolding, and so. Half the country, if they didn't realize they were tuning into the Mercury Theater of the Air, they thought that maybe Martians had landed because that's what the broadcast sounded like. And I always wondered whether that was exaggerated, but I've met, I do a lot of getting up and talking, and I was in a small town once giving a talk about science fiction, I guess. And we were talking about that, and someone in the audience remembered that night and remembered her mother running around the house, nailing up boards to the windows because she heard it on the radio and the Martians were coming, and absolute panic was going on in the house. And multiplied that by the entire country. And Wells, if he wasn't well known already, and I think he'd already been on the cover of Time magazine. After that, he was famous, all across the country, and Hollywood was fairly soon calling his name.
I love the clip of him being interviewed afterwards and asking him about it. And you can just tell by looking at him and the way he's answering, and he's playing dumb. He's literally playing dumb, and you can see it in his face and he's saying stuff like, "Oh, well, we had no idea that people would react that way. We're as shocked as you are that this is what," and he's so full of shit. And you could tell he is so full of shit because he knew exactly what he was doing and he knew how brilliant it was going to be. And that's sort of kind of the way he was through his whole life, isn't it? Like he carried that sort of vainglorious attitude about himself and the world throughout his entire life. And later on, of course, he becomes larger than life. There's a story about him sitting in the theater during the Mercury Theater years, during rehearsals, sitting there in the dark eating entire quarts of ice cream during the rehearsal process. And so it's no surprise it became so big later on.
Yeah, everything was gigantic. All the appetites and all the energies, and wanting to do. He was a film director. He was a radio actor. He was a newspaper columnist for a while. He had all those gigantic appetites, and of course, literally, they did kind of catch up with him later, I guess. But it is something to see.
They eventually had to pass a new law in New York because he would hire an ambulance to take him from one studio to another, or from the theater rehearsal to the recording studio. He would hire an ambulance, lights and sirens, in order to beat traffic and get there on time. And they eventually had to outlaw that. But that's how smart he was, right? He would think so far ahead of everybody else.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
It's amazing. Yeah.
When it comes to his adaptations, and of course we're going to talk a lot about Chimes at Midnight, but I wanted to sort of set the stage, as it were, for the listeners. But when it comes to his adaptations, he started adapting Shakespeare as an adolescent, and with a piece that was sort of a conflation of the history plays that he called Winter of Our Discontent. Really does make him sort of this prodigy, doesn't it? That out of, his teen years, he's already taking Shakespeare plays, combining them together, creating sort of this storyline to tie it all together. And it's obvious that he had quite an affinity for the history plays, and of course, Henry IV.
Yeah. He's either a child genius, or he's an arrogant little shit, or possibly combination, of those things. And because think of just the nerve of being a teenager and saying, you know what, I'm just going to cut down all these plays. I'm gonna just take a scalpel or maybe a hatchet and move all of this dialogue and action out of it, and I'll create this new thing out of the history plays. But yeah, that was his first stab at it, and then he would return to that idea in different forms throughout his career. What in the late 1930s in New York, and then later in Ireland, and I think it was 1960 that he did manage to get a production, quite a long one, of that would be the precursor of Chimes at Midnight, where you're taking bits and pieces from everything, and it would give him a chance to play Falstaff, which he wanted to play that piece of the histories. So he was tinkering with this really for decades. Supposedly, according to the actor Keith Baxter, who plays Prince Hal in the stage production in Ireland, and then 5 years later in the film Chimes at Midnight, Welles took him aside during the stage production, which was completely crazy and chaotic and everything, because that seemed to trail Welles a lot, that atmosphere of chaos. And he said, don't worry too much about this stage production. This is really a rehearsal for the movie that we're going to make someday. So there's the bravado again. I mean, he didn't have financing. He didn't, have any of that. But he was thinking about the movies. He was thinking about the movie version already.
You mentioned earlier about him sort of taking over his school theater program, but what do we really know about his education? Here he is, this boy genius, but you can have genius, but if you stick genius in the middle of a farm in Kenosha, Wisconsin, maybe he figures out a new way of plowing a field or milking a cow, but doesn't become this great filmmaker and Shakespearean actor. What else do we know about his education that sort of helped foster that genius into what he became?
Well, when he was at this school, which was called the Todd School for Boys, I think was the name of it, he ran into a mentor, a really kind of a father figure named Roger Hill, and he's one of the biggest figures in Welles's story, because he obviously recognized something and sort of handed this young boy the keys to the kingdom, or at least the backstage area, and really mentored him. And it's when you read Welles' biographies, this is such an important relationship that whatever kind of formal education Welles was getting otherwise, and he certainly didn't, go to college or university as we would know it. He was already off directing on Broadway, but this mentor relationship with a father figure was really central, and Welles absorbed everything, both about literature and theater, but probably also about how to comport yourself in the world, from Roger Hill. And Roger Hill, I think I start my piece about Chimes at Midnight by describing Welles working on an idea that Roger Hill had for a book that would be called Everybody's Shakespeare, which would make Shakespeare accessible to the masses, or however you want to say it, and which Hill, the older person in the relationship, was essentially saying, "You take it and run with it. We'll collaborate a little bit, but you're the genius here. So you go ahead and write this." So this kind of mentorship kind of took the place of an advanced education, I guess you could say. But Welles seemed to be such a one of those people who absorbs information from every direction. And so if you see interviews with him or read, there's a long interview book that Peter Bogdanovich did, for instance, the film director Peter Bogdanovich. You'll listen to Welles.
They had a personal relationship too. So Peter, as far as biographers go, like Peter knew Welles. They knew each other quite well. There was an intimacy there, and I use that term as far as familiarity, obviously not in a sexual way, but they were very close. And so I think that Bogdanovich is obviously a very reliable source when it comes to biographies of Welles.
Yeah, and Welles was pretty comfortable with him, and So you can read those interviews and just see that you pick out the most obscure topic, and Wells will have some opinion on it. Somehow you get the impression that he's learned something about this, where this particular wine comes from on a hillside in Spain, and by God, he knows about it somehow, or painting of the 16th century or whatever it is. So he was just one of those partly educated, perhaps, but also an autodidact who just remembered everything. And again was probably making stuff up too, because that was part of his personality, was to bluff his way into things. And maybe that's part of his genius, I suppose.
Well, you describe it as a lifelong devotion to Shakespeare, and I don't disagree with that at all, of course. But you also state that you feel that Wells created three of, and I'm quoting you here, three of the most ambitious Shakespeare films in the history of film. That's some statement. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Like why you believe that, why you feel that way?
Yeah, I think it has to do with the fact that, there are good films of Shakespeare where the text has been rendered faithfully, and intelligent people have worked on it, and great actors are in it, perhaps. But the difference with Wells's films is that as a film director, he exuded what I'm always telling my students when I'm teaching classes, cinematic language. He thought in movie images and sounds. Sound is very important to Wells as a man of radio, and all these other things. And so there's a kind of a fluency to what you're watching, where the words of Shakespeare and the action is also served by camera movement and shadow, and the way a scene is lighted, the way a scene is paced, the way a scene is cut, with rapidity or with slowness, the way the camera looks from a distance or suddenly goes to close up. All of that, all of the cinematic language, Wells was of course, if you've ever seen Citizen Kane, you know this. He was one of the great geniuses at. And so I think that's kind of what I'm getting at when I suggest that. There are other Shakespeare movies that work perfectly well, but Wells is a cinematic genius, and so that's why they're so alive to me. He's understood Shakespeare. He's translated, in a way, Shakespeare into a visual and sonic experience that goes hand in hand with the actual Shakespearean words.
Well, and Kane in itself is sort of a Shakespearean tragedy, in itself, isn't it? Like, Citizen Kane is, Charles Foster Kane is definitely this, Shakespeare anti-hero in so many ways.
Yeah. And yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. You can, Wells has absorbed so much from Shakespeare, and you think about it, he was 25 when he made Citizen Kane, and you think, how does someone see a whole lifetime like that when they're 25 years old? How do you envision that, what old age looks like on film, which is so beautifully projected in Citizen Kane in certain scenes and all that stuff. And I don't doubt that absorbing Shakespeare was part of what did that for Wells.
Well, and his ability to play Kane through his life, through the life of the character, from in his young, late teens, early 20s, all the way through to old age himself. Like it's just demonstrates his ability as an actor at that age to be able to grasp a character like that and to play it through the way he does in the film. People give that film a lot of credit, and I think one of the things they don't give a lot of credit to are the performances in the film. Like the film sort of overshadows, excuse me, how good the actors actually are in the film as well.
Yes, I think you're probably right there. It is so dazzling as a movie that you can sometimes give them short shrift. But yeah, his grasp of that phrase about having an old soul, or he at least had a great empathy. And how can you, if you do immerse yourself in Shakespeare, how can you not get that long view of life? And disappointment and disaster, catastrophe, the breaking of bonds, as he has sometimes talked about Chimes at Midnight, being about the breaking of a friendship between Prince Hal and Falstaff. Yeah, I think Wells absolutely got a lot of that wisdom from his. He knew Shakespeare. He understood it and responded to it so beautifully.
Your analysis is almost Freudian, in fact, when it comes to Wells' affinity for Shakespeare. And you've stated that he approached Shakespeare with a mix of bravado and insecurity. That's the title of your paper, An American in King Henry's Court. Share a little bit more about what you mean by that. A mix of bravado and insecurity, because we're talking a lot about his arrogance and his approach to life, but you sort of dig deeper into his psyche in your analysis, like I said, sort of a Freudian way. And I'd like you to sort of share that a little more with the listeners.
I will. Thank you. First of all, my father was a psychoanalyst, so it's possible that I come by this. Honestly, I'm not sure, but this piece, this paper that I wrote is a little bit unlike a lot of the other criticism that I've written in my career, and I wrote it for I'll just provide this frame, a Shakespeare conference that was going on in a city in Romania in 2016 called Iași. It's a great, wonderful city, and I had a Fulbright specialist grant to go to Romania for 3 weeks, and part of it was attending this conference. Which is, I'm not really an academic. I do teach, but I'm not of the world of academia or anything like that. So it was a little bit different for me. It was kind of a challenge that this was an academic conference, and I'm going to do a paper. I think I'll write about Orson Welles, and so the approach that I took, it does have a little bit of this psychoanalytic element going on, and I felt like I had some room to play around with that a little bit. And so I do think there's the anxiety part of it. I was just thinking about some of there are places in Wells's interviews and things where he does betray a certain inferiority complex, as they used to call it in the old days. And when I started researching that and looking for it, it turned out that he did have some anxieties as an American adapter of Shakespeare compared to the great standard of the English. Of course, the English obviously they own Shakespeare, right? I mean, he's theirs, and Wells was kind of constantly comparing himself to Laurence Olivier. They worked together at least once in a really uncomfortable situation. But I think, I mean, that so many people in life who go through life with bravado or perceived arrogance are in fact insecure, and that is why they are so loud, and maybe trying to convince themselves that they are what they say they are. And so there was something there, and the way I went into it for this piece was to suggest that what if Wells, who everybody, his performance as Falstaff, I think, is wonderful, and most people who have written about it have said, well, of course, Orson Welles and Falstaff, it's a natural fit. I mean, even the largeness of Wells's body, as we were talking earlier, kind of fits the Falstaffian profile, literally. And my thing was what if Wells identifies with Prince Hal too? Yes, he's bigger than life, like Falstaff, but what if he's a little like Prince Hal in the sense of being born into something that made him larger than life? In Prince Hal's case, it's being born of royalty. In Wells's case, it's being a boy genius who's people are focused on him from a very young age and have great expectations. And hey, this kid's a genius. He's gonna be something. And what if you have imposter syndrome in the midst of all that? What if you're not quite sure about that? And I think there are things in Chimes at Midnight that possibly suggest that about Prince Hal. There are certain like close-ups where he's delivering a soliloquy or something, where you see the cracks beneath the confident surface of this, royal son who has a difficult father, who seems to be unloving and quite cold in John Gielgud's brilliant performance. And what if Wells kind of sees himself that way? What if part of his attraction to the Henry the Fourth plays is that he maybe sees a little bit of himself in Prince Hal as well as Falstaff. So that's where I started with it, and then for the psychoanalytic stuff, I was thinking about Wells and his own father, and I go into this a little bit. And his father was actually a sort of a Falstaffian character. He was quite a party goer and a great. He was traveling around the world. He was dragging young Orson off on steamships to go to Asia when he was a little kid. All kinds of interesting things. He was also wildly alcoholic, and so at some point there's Wells, people who were close to Wells told him that he needed to cut the father out of his life until he got off the booze. And so Wells decided to do that, didn't see the father. And shortly after that, Orson Welles' father died alone in a hotel room from whatever complications of alcohol it was. And apparently this perceived betrayal haunted Orson Welles. He was still referring to it toward the end of his life. And you wonder if that comes into play in the great scene in Henry IV Part 2 and in Chimes at Midnight, the film, where Hal, now risen to the throne himself, renounces Falstaff, renounces their friendship, and says he does not know this old man. And it's a great moment. It's a very emotional moment, the way Wells films it too. It's one of the most emotional things I think Wells ever shot or staged for a movie. So that's sort of the gist of my the psychoanalytic part of this article, I would say.
Well, Chimes at Midnight is arguably one of the best Shakespeare film adaptations ever created. In fact, some theater companies have even tried to replicate Wells' cuts and series of scenes for the stage. Now, I haven't seen any of those stage productions, so I don't know whether or not it can work, but based on the film and your commentary about specific film shots, you talk about some of those close-ups that are so important. I just don't think that his style can possibly be replicated.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point that you're raising, and I'm trying to envision that myself as you're doing it, and I kind of agree. I don't think it would quite work because he does, as a vigorous film director, he believes in the cut, and there are some great moments where you cut from one thing to another, and there's a fantastic the scene after the renunciation. I think it's after the renunciation. You see Falstaff kind of toddling off in the distance, and it's a very, very long shot. So Falstaff is this tiny figure now, sort of disappearing in the darkness, where he has been buoyant and bigger than life. And you could do that on the stage for sure. You could try to get that, but it's certainly very powerful when you have that camera frame and all that distance, and you can create those kinds of things. Yeah, that's such a great subject. Of course, is how theater rules are different from movie rules, and how you have to rethink that and reshape that.
But he obviously allowed one to sort of inform the other, and I think that's part of the brilliance. We looking back at Citizen Kane, which still holds the title from the American Film Institute as the greatest film of all time, because it's this perfect combination of script and cinematography, obviously paired with a great score, art direction, acting performances we talked about, but also the sheer revolutionary advances in film that all films today owe credit to. In later Shakespeare films, Wells makes great use of the voiceover soliloquy that has also been replicated many times in other Shakespeare films by other filmmakers since. The idea that we're hearing the character's thoughts rather than seeing the character deliver the monologue or the soliloquy, which is something that he basically created for film that even as early as late as Ian McKellen as King Lear recently copied that same style. So it's just kind of incredible that, as you refer to him as this wunderkind, what he has done for the art of film as well as the portrayal of Shakespearean works, not only on the stage but on film, in ways that I believe made him the perfect person to be on the cover of Time magazine at the age of 22.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's that voiceover. When you think about it, you think, well, oh, of course, yeah. Why not do a soliloquy as a voiceover? If you're making a movie, it works perfectly well. But yeah, Wells he did that for his film of Macbeth in 1948, which was very low budget. And as long as you're bringing up an interesting thing about the process of filmmaking too, because both Chimes at Midnight and Wells's film of Othello, which was released in the early 50s, not very well released, but they were both made in really patchwork ways. The days of Wells working for a Hollywood studio were long behind him. He was now in Europe most of the time and acting in other people's movies so that he could take the money, buy some film stock, and so on, and make his own films. And both of Othello and Chimes at Midnight have this wild production history where they have to pause in the production because Orson has run out of funds, or some actor has to leave, or whatever it is. They're kind of crazy. So you're watching the movie and you might be watching a scene where one person's close up was shot a year after the other person's close up in the scene, and they were shot in two different countries. That was the kind of thing that he was dealing with at the time.
Well, it's very interesting, isn't it, that his Citizen Kane moment in his life almost destroyed him. I think everybody is aware of William Randolph Hearst connection and how Hearst literally tried to destroy the film and tried to destroy Wells after that. And it almost then leads to his return to Shakespeare as a necessity and a means for continuing his craft. And as you talk about, I think it was a 2-week filming of Macbeth in 1948, sort of a guerrilla style takeover of a location with borrowed costumes from a local theater and the assembly of a group of well-trained theater actors who were mostly novices to film, and then just sort of descending on these castle ruins to make this film. And it's iconic. It's so Wellesian, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. He just had, I mean, in the innovation department, he tried something. He tried to record all of the dialogue first as well. He had this idea on Macbeth that both as a budgetary thing of moving the shooting along, but also as an experiment. Would it be interesting to record the dialogue first and have the actors sort of lip sync it or something? It didn't really work out. But he was always pushing these things and trying things, and running into all kinds of problems. But I don't know, the scrappiness of his 3 Shakespeare films has something to do with their energy too. I think there's something about that need to improvise at times and to come up with solutions, and that they really there's something in them that's really really alive, and really inventive. It would have been great to see what he would have done with larger budgets, of course, but they go by their own rules.
Well, and I love this quote that you have here, where you say that he appears to have taken to heart Macbeth's panicked words. But now I am cabined, cribbed, confined, bound into saucy doubts and fears. And I love how you interpret that as becoming sort of the operating principle for both his performance and, as you put it, the film's mise en scène. Am I pronouncing that right? My French is terrible.
Mise en scène, yes.
Mise en scène.
It's a great, that great French term. We don't have anything quite like it in the U.S., but it just means putting things in place, literally. And he, that's kind of my theory there. That line of Macbeth's is so evocative, and so yeah, you feel like when you're watching that movie that it's like a series of traps and narrow spaces and ceilings that come down, and everybody's sort of cabined, as that Shakespearean word
It's
in
so
it.
dark too. It's a black and white movie, but it's also, I think, purposefully dark.
Yes, very very dark.
Now, maybe he
Very
couldn't afford a lot of lighting instruments, so I don't know.
Yeah, you never know. It certainly captures something though in that the darkness of that. But yeah, it's a strange movie, but it's kind of endlessly interesting to watch.
And then you mentioned his film Othello, which is very similar scenario. Like you mentioned, he was running out of money. It was very low budget. And P.S.
Yeah.
though, no white man today could do that. No, like it's just impossible now.
No, no.
There were a
Yeah.
lot of things that he got away with that you would never get away with today. Including showing up in Ireland and claiming to be some great actor because they couldn't just Google it, could they?
Yeah, right, right. That was the advantage.
Yeah, but truth be told, his performance of Othello is not his greatest.
Yeah, he kind of, well, I mean, Iago always gets to steal that show anyway, so maybe that's built into the thing. But he's there's a thing that I have in my article about his sense of how to play quote unquote great men, and the thing that he always manages to do quite well is to suggest the weakness that is not so far from the surface of the great man. And so I think he does capture that pretty well in Othello. The character is in his eyes is kind of blustery, but is also sometimes diminished and sometimes uncertain. Um, so yeah, he gets that apart pretty well. He gets that across pretty well, but he almost seems to get lost in the film itself. Like it's such a frantic movie in interesting ways, I think. But you sometimes, I have sometimes wondered whether Wells paid attention to his own performances that much in the midst of trying to be this, the master of the three ring circus that was going on in his productions. Um, but I think Falstaff probably is the exception of that. I do like his Falstaff more than his performance as Othello, I guess.
Well, I've never made a film, but I have self-directed Shakespearean characters in Shakespeare productions, and I can tell you it is a very difficult thing to do, to be the producer, the director, and playing a leading role on the stage in the production that you're directing and producing. What I always found is important is that you have to have people that you trust who know you as an actor, who sort of watch your performance in the rehearsal process and give you their notes and share with you the things that they see that you can't see in yourself. I suppose in filming, you have dailies to look at and you could go, oh, what did I do there? Or why did I make that choice? Or, we need to refilm that scene because I was horrible there or whatever. I mean, I suppose you could do that in dailies. I believe Mel Gibson is known for sort of watching the dailies and going back and going, oh no, that I sucked right there. I need to fix that in the films where he is also director and star. But yeah, it's very difficult. And you're right. I'm not sure that, I don't know that a person like Wells would have someone who he would say, okay, sit there in my chair and watch me do this scene and tell me what you see. I don't know that he has that in him.
Yeah, that's right. He was a bit of a one-man band. His Iago was the Irish actor. I suppose he pronounced his name McKeel. I don't know, but McKeel Macklemore, and he was one of the people who Wells met as a teenager in Ireland, and was a distinguished actor and helped run that theater. So possibly maybe he had some. Because he had been a former mentor, maybe he had some feedback to give Wells, but not
the best
I can't
Iago
imagine
though either. I'm not real fond of his performance, I have to say.
Yeah.
It seems very melodramatic and a little bit, over the top to me.
Yeah, it's definitely out there. I was going to say something. I can't remember. I can't. Yeah, I can. I myself can't imagine how you go from being a field general to suddenly the camera's rolling, and then you have to find the still space within yourself to. Oh yes, I'm giving this performance. It's supposed to be informed by these various plot elements and personality things that I thought about. It's pretty astonishing.
Well, and nonetheless, you describe it, and I love the way that I love your writing. You're a very
oh, thank you.
Yeah, you're a clever writer, and you do so in such a way that doesn't alienate the reader. You're not being clever for clever's sake. You're sharing your ideas in a clever way, and I really enjoy that about your writing. But I love how you say, he's a heroic statue that disintegrates before our eyes, slipping off the screen in vertiginous or slanted camera angles, disappearing in the bric-a-brac of the set design, lost in the slashing, jagged editing. Great sentence, man.
Damn, that is pretty good.
Yeah.
I guess
and you really capture that Wellesian style right there, too.
Okay. Good. That's what you try to do as a writer. Yes, to convey some sense of that film. It is interesting that he almost is for all of this high ego kind of character that we've been talking about, that his Othello, he allows his Othello to in fact slide out of the frame at times, or to be lost inside it, or to be diminished. He had a sense of the character for sure in designing that cinematic approach to that.
But your critique is also honest in that, you say that part of the style came out of necessity. You say born of the film's haphazard production schedule, which is true. That's part of the history of it, as we know. So, you're honest in that it works, but it may have been accidental in some ways that it works, right?
Yeah. Wells makes it work. And I, you think of like he sometimes he has to cut rapidly because the filming was so haphazard, and he's, borrowing film from another production and grabbing this actor over here, and in some cases dubbing actors who couldn't come back for the post syncing of the movie with his own voice, which is sort of a strange phenomenon to hear. So it has got that scrappy quality, but if you take his Othello to be a portrait of disintegration, which I think you could say that it is, then maybe the fact that the film seems to be kind of falling apart or exploding a little bit, you can sort of justify it. But the ingenuity part, of course, the story about Othello that people sometimes cite is they were going to shoot a key scene, and the costumes did not arrive. Or he had never paid for them. He was known for walking out on bills that came due, as I'm sure you've heard. And so he said, "Oh, we got to shoot this. We're on a low budget, and we got the actors for this one day. So the scene will now be set in a bathhouse, and everybody get a towel. Let's get some towels, and we'll shoot the scene. And so you do this without costumes. That's how you solve a problem." And Wells, was very used to solving problems at that point. And maybe it works for the movie. Then maybe it's interesting to watch the men of power in this world, half naked and stripped a little bit, and sitting around in the baths, as apparently they can do. Wells kind of he takes lemons and he makes, if not lemonade, then some interesting concoction out of it.
Genius cannot be constrained by monetary necessity. What are you talking about?
Absolutely. That's right.
Genius needs no money.
He sure would have liked some or more. But I mean, Wells, such an, that when I was growing up, there he was on TV selling Paul Masson wine in TV commercials
Right.
and doing whatever he needed to do to pay the bills and maybe make one more movie or try to make another movie. So he was working it.
You are kinder to him as an actor, I think, in your criticism of Othello when you talk about it. I think this is so important. His, as you put it, stentorian voice. And he did have that unique, very specific voice that he ended up able to make some money doing voiceovers, even doing cartoons at one point in his life. But it comes from that history of being on the radio. And so as you mentioned, he was a radio man and he understood the importance of sound and sort of the temor of delivery of dialogue and its importance to, if you think about it in Elizabethan times, they would say, we're going to go hear a play. They didn't say they were going to go see a play.
Mm. Yeah, he knew. I agree about the radio part, and it allowed him to develop and play and tinker. And so by the time he gets to Citizen Kane or something, he knows he's got this instrument and he can use it, like a musician. If he wants to play it in this way, he'll do it this way, and so on. And so he definitely. He worked it as throughout his career. He needed cash. He could trundle that voice out, and somebody going to do a trailer for some big movie. Well, Orson Welles could be there and lend it some authority and all that. So he was definitely not above doing that kind of thing.
Quiller Nation, I hope you have been enjoying this great conversation with Robert Horton about the inimitable Orson Welles. Robert and I had so much to talk about on the subject of Welles that I decided to split the episode into two parts. In the second half of the episode, we dive deeper into Chimes at Midnight, Falstaff, Freud, Gielgud, Olivier, and more. Until then, we'll leave things here for now. But before we close out this first half, I do want to shout out to all of you who keep the program going through your contributions to our Patreon page. And a special shout out to our August Quiller of the Month, Michael Hannigan. As always, Quiller Nation, thank you for being here and keep asking questions.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a rating and review in your podcast player. For even more, visit our website, don'tquillthepodcast.com. There you can find official merchandise in our shop, as well as a link to our Patreon. This show is made possible by people like you. We hope you'll consider showing your support by becoming a monthly patron, where you'll receive bonus material and tons of exclusive perks. You can also join in the conversation on our Discord and by following us at Don't Quill the Pod on all social media. All of this can be found at don'tquillthepodcast.com. don'tquillthepodcast.com.
It's Dragon Wagon.